CJ from San Andreas. That's the answer I get every time I talk to a very specific type of gamer about inclusion in video games. The games industry is undergoing a shift. In the past, we had stories that told a very specific narrative from a very specific point of view with a very specific goal in mind. Now games are starting to include stories and characters from a variety of different cultures. And rather than be excited about the opportunity to play video games that allow you to immerse yourself in a different culture, we instead have a group of anti-woke gamers on the internet complaining about anything and everything that has to do with making games more diverse and more inclusive. Why is that? First, let's define what we mean by anti-woke gamer. These are gamers who resist the inclusion of progressive themes and diverse characters in video games. They often prefer traditional or old school gaming narratives and may feel that modern changes are unnecessary or forced. For instance, they might criticize games like The Last of Us Part 2 for featuring LGBTQ+ characters, or Horizon Forbidden West for its focus on strong female protagonists. These gamers often voice their opinions loudly on social media and gaming forums, creating a significant amount of discourse around what they see as wokeness infiltrating their beloved hobby. Now that we've defined the anti-woke gamer, let's delve into the concept of the victim complex. A victim complex in psychological terms is the perception of being persecuted or unfairly treated. People with this complex tend to view themselves as targets of hostility, even when there's no clear evidence of such treatment. For anti-woke gamers, this complex manifests as a belief that the gaming industry is out to undermine or erase their preferred gaming culture. They see the inclusion of diverse characters and progressive themes as personal attacks rather than natural evolutions of the medium. This perception of victimhood can lead to aggressive behavior online, including harassment campaigns against developers and negative review bombing of games that they perceive as too woke. To understand the anti-woke gamer's victim complex, we need to look at the historical context of gaming. In the early days, video games often focused on simpler narratives and targeted a specific demographic, mainly straight white men. This isn't to demonize straight white men, it's simply to point out that for a long time, they were the target demographics of video games. Games like Super Mario Bros. And Doom were straightforward, easy to understand, and didn't require any critical thinking. These games provided clear objectives, uncomplicated storylines, and familiar tropes that resonated with their core audience. Tropes like the white savior, the damsel in distress, or the evil foreigner were common and unchallenged. However, as society has evolved, so has the gaming industry. There's a growing awareness and demand for representation and inclusivity in games. Modern games now feature complex storytelling and diverse characters to reflect the real world more accurately. Games like The Last of Us Part 2 and Horizon Forbidden West introduce LGBTQ+ characters and strong female protagonists, challenging traditional gaming narratives and requiring players to engage with more critical and nuanced themes. This shift has been embraced by many, but resisted by some. For those who prefer the traditional, simpler approach, these changes feel like a loss or displacement. They perceive these new narratives as a threat to the comfortable gaming experiences they once enjoyed. But if we think critically, this resistance is a reflection of their fear of change and their victim complex. It's not just about the games themselves, but about their perceived loss of identity and status within the gaming culture. Let's explore how the victim complex manifests among anti-woke gamers.
Sorry, did you want to get immersed in our world? Yeah, well, guess what? Fucking pronouns! Fucking gender ambiguity! Fucking current day Californian shit! Because that's all we fucking know! Because we're boring! We're so...
One of the most prominent manifestations is the aggressive online behavior. Anti-woke gamers often express their dissatisfaction through harassment campaigns against developers and negative review bombing of games they perceive as too woke. For instance, The Last of Us Part 2 received a barrage of negative reviews, not for the gameplay or mechanics, but for its inclusive narrative and diverse characters. This behavior is not just limited to review sites. Social media platforms and gaming forums also see a surge in hostile comments and heated debates whenever a game includes progressive themes. These gamers often frame their arguments around the idea that the industry is forcing political correctness or wokeness on them, thus positioning themselves as victims of a broader cultural shift. In a way, this behavior allows them to feel like heroes in their own story. When games no longer cater exclusively to their preferences, they seek to reclaim that feeling of heroism by saving the gaming community from what they see as unwelcome changes. By positioning themselves as the defenders of traditional gaming values, they recreate the hero narrative outside of the game, placing themselves as saviors of the true gaming culture. This need to be the hero further entrenches their victim complex, perpetuating a cycle of outrage and resistance. To illustrate how the victim complex of anti-woke gamers manifests in real-world scenarios, let's examine some case studies. One of the most infamous examples is Gamergate. Initially presented as a campaign for ethics in game journalism, it quickly devolved into a widespread harassment primarily targeting female developers and critics. This movement reflected the fears of anti-woke gamers who felt threatened by increasing diversity and progressive voices within the gaming community. Another example is the backlash against The Last of Us Part 2. The game faced significant negative reviews and social media outrage, not because of its gameplay, but because of its inclusive narrative. Characters representing LGBTQ+ communities and strong female leads were seen as a threat to traditional gaming norms. Similarly, Horizon Forbidden West faced criticism for its protagonist, Aloy, a strong female character who defied conventional gender roles. Despite the game's success, some players felt alienated and reacted negatively, framing their dissatisfaction as a stand against forced wokeness. In each of these cases, we see the same pattern: anti-woke gamers positioning themselves as victims of a changing industry. They frame their resistance as a noble quest to preserve the true essence of gaming, but in reality, it's a reaction to their own fear of losing a comfortable and familiar narrative. What's particularly striking is how this victim complex transforms their actions into a distorted form of heroism. By rallying against wokeness, they cast themselves as the defenders of gaming purity, fighting to save their community from the encroaching forces of change. But in this self-appointed role as the saviors of gaming, they end up perpetuating a cycle of toxicity and exclusion. Their battle isn't just against new characters or stories, but against the very idea that gaming can be a space for everyone. In trying to be the heroes of their own story, they become the villains in the larger narrative of gaming's evolution. To truly understand the victim complex among anti-woke gamers, we need to delve into the psychology behind it. At its core, the victim complex is rooted in a fear of change. For many anti-woke gamers, video games were a refuge, a place where they felt a sense of control and identity.
Gaming really is a great way to just tune the world out. It's always good to be able to just sit down and completely tune everything out and not have to be exposed to more politics. And some of us were stupid enough to think that video games might continue to be more or less safe from that. But we were wrong.
As the industry evolves to include more diverse narratives and characters, this sense of control is threatened. This fear of change is often tied to a fear of losing one's identity. When games no longer cater exclusively to their preferences, these gamers feel alienated. The narratives they once found comfort in are replaced by stories that challenge their worldview. Additionally, there's a significant element of nostalgia. The simpler, traditional games evoke a sense of longing for the past, a time when they felt secure and validated. Modern games, with their complex and inclusive narratives, disrupt this nostalgia, leading to feelings of loss and frustration. Another psychological factor is the need for validation. By resisting these changes, anti-woke gamers seek to reaffirm their place within the gaming community. They view themselves as the gatekeepers of true gaming culture, clinging to the belief that their preferences should remain dominant. But this need for validation, again, often manifests as aggressive behavior online. By attacking developers and negatively reviewing inclusive games, they attempt to reassert their control over the narrative. This behavior isn't just defensive, it's an attempt to bully the industry into submission, to force it back into the mold that they find the most comfortable. This behavior reveals a deep insecurity. Their aggressive stance is a mask for the fear that their once dominant position in the gaming world is slipping away. They lash out not because they're truly protecting gaming, but because they cannot accept that the world is changing and that they need to adapt. Ultimately, the victim complex serves as a defense mechanism. It allows these gamers to externalize their fear and frustrations, positioning themselves as the righteous defenders of gaming purity. But in doing so, they not only alienate themselves further, but also contribute to a toxic environment that stifles creativity and diversity. The irony is that in their quest to save gaming, they become the very villains they despise, creating a hostile environment that drives away new ideas and voices. They cling to a past that can never return, instead of embracing a future where gaming can be richer and more inclusive for everyone. Now that we've dissected the victim complex of anti-woke gamers, the next step is to explore how we can address this issue constructively. Firstly, it's important to foster open dialogue. The gaming community needs to create spaces where these concerns can be discussed without descending into hostility. By encouraging respectful conversations, we can begin to bridge the gap between different perspectives. Developers and content creators also play a crucial role. They should continue to include diverse narratives and characters while also engaging with their audience to explain why these changes are important. Transparency and communication can help mitigate the backlash and foster understanding. Moreover, education about the benefits of diversity and inclusivity is essential. Highlighting how diverse perspectives can enrich gaming experiences and make them more immersive and relatable for a broader audience can shift perceptions. It's also vital to address the underlying fears and insecurities. Helping gamers understand that inclusivity doesn't mean erasing their experiences, but rather expanding the world of gaming to be more representative can reduce the sense of threat. Finally, we must hold accountable those who perpetuate toxicity and harassment. Creating and enforcing community guidelines that promote respect and inclusivity will help build a healthier gaming environment. To recap, the victim complex among anti-woke gamers is deeply rooted in a fear of change, a longing for nostalgia, and a desperate need for validation. These gamers often position themselves as the defenders of true gaming, but their aggressive behavior and resistance to inclusivity only to serve to alienate others and stifle the industry's growth. We've seen how this complex manifests in real-world scenarios like Gamergate and the backlash to inclusive games. The hostility and toxicity are not just about the games themselves, but are driven by a deeper struggle with identity and a refusal to accept a more diverse gaming landscape. By fostering open dialogue, promoting education about inclusivity, and holding accountable those who perpetuate toxicity, we can begin to address these issues and create a more welcoming gaming community. The future of gaming is inclusive, diverse, and richer for it, and it's time for everybody to embrace that change. One rebuttal that I know I'm going to get in the comments on this video is that we don't care about all of these things. We don't care that they're included in the games. We just don't want them to be forced. And when you have the privilege of booting up any video game since gaming's inception and can find yourself accurately represented across a variety of different genres, of course, any amount of inclusion is going to feel forced to you. I'm not saying there haven't been some terrible implementations of inclusion in games. I mentioned CJ from San Andreas at the beginning. My guy didn't even get the luxury of being called a crime boss. He was simply a thug drug dealer in the hood trying to get out. Like, it's time for different stories. The truth is that white supremacy is real. We see it in our healthcare system, we see it in the entertainment industry, and now we're seeing its effects in video games. Just like all these other industries were made to serve a very specific demographic of people, video games have been around to serve a very specific demographic of gamer, and that is changing, and any amount of change in a system like this is going to be threatening. While I could focus on the problem, and so could you, it's better if we think about focusing on solutions. The first one is that just ignore them. When it shows up in your news feed, say not interested, just ignore it. There is no reason to continue to bring yourself down into the mud and play with people who don't possess the range to understand. Anyone who thinks that video games are not political.
More and more as games are released or even updated and remastered, you see more and more political messaging in games that otherwise didn't have it before.
Or that video games shouldn't be political, or that video games haven't had political themes, have only been playing video games simply for the mechanics. And as a mindful gamer, I know it might be difficult to fathom just playing a game for the mechanics, but there are people that do. And that's why they are so upset that these themes are, well, the real reason they're upset is because they have internalized issues that they need to deal with. And like, I want to have empathy and understanding for them. I really do. I know what it's like to be entrenched in that Eurocentric thinking. Every single video game character that I ever created in a game was always a white woman, and I never ever questioned that, ever. So to them, I'm quite sure that all of this is terrifying. They can't stop the change, but they can complain about it loudly and potentially ruin people's livelihoods in the process. So instead of giving their thoughts and ideas and opinions the time of day, we're going to focus on celebrating the diversity and the rich narratives of new video games coming out by independent developers that really showcase how beautiful and wonderful video games can be when we tell stories that everyone can relate to. Video games are for everyone, and it's time that our video games start reflecting that. If you like this video, please like and subscribe for more mindful videos about video games. And remember, how you do anything is how you do everything. So make sure that you're playing your games with intention. I'll see y'all next time.